Hi, I'm going to do my Lit Circle project through an oral presentation through a video, as I feel speaking is one of my strengths and I feel I can really verbally communicate and express myself how I'd like to through this method. I have tried to do this probably 100 times and it hasn't really worked out very well. I've had difficulties, so fingers crossed that this is the time that works, and I'm so sorry for the delay, but hopefully this one works. So first things first, I read Open, an autobiography by Andre Agassi. Amazing book, but I felt that there was one huge, major, significant part in this, which is the topic I'll be talking about today, which is the conflict within it. I felt it was evident throughout the whole book, and even though Andre Agassi went through so many conflicts, and not all small conflicts, some huge major conflicts, the conflict against himself and his mind was probably the biggest conflict in the book that really laid out the rest of the events in the story and was the most significant thing. Some of the conflicts that happened within the book, for example, was his battle with drugs. And this is just an article just saying how he revealed through his book specifically that he dealt with drug issues like crystal meth. From a young age, Andre Agassi dealt with the conflict of his family and his father, who was very pushy and, you have to be the best, you have to be number one, you have to be good enough. He was very isolating, and he isolated his child on a tennis court. He didn't have a childhood. It was very, you must succeed, you have to be the best. And, he went against this monster or so-called tennis machine every day. And he even recalls being a child and describing this tennis ball machine to be a monster. And so early on in his life, it was engraved that he must be the best. And this had a significant role on the way he thought about his life and the world surrounding him. And this pressure really engraved and began a battle in his mind that stayed with him throughout his whole life. So no matter what major conflicts were around him, the biggest conflict he dealt with his whole life was a conflict with himself. At a young age, Andre Agassi was very isolated. So he couldn't do anything about the battle within himself. And I felt once he got the freedom to escape his family and his father, that's when he started experimenting with drugs. He went through a rebel phase where he dyed his hair pink, he got a piercing. He had this void that he had filled with his mind. This one thing that he was constantly battling. I think the problem is that Andre Agassi, he never knew who he was, because tennis had overruled any character traits or personality traits he would ever develop, because it had been engraved in him that tennis is his life, he must be number one. So I think at a certain age, he was trying to find himself and find that missing piece that he had never discovered. But I think the problem was that even though he was being a rebel, he was still in the same situation, still playing tennis, surrounded by people saying you have to be number one. So even though he tried to sort of escape the mindset that he had developed from a young age, people around him and people surrounding him never let him truly discover who he was. So as he got older, and he did become a very famous and well-known tennis player himself, he went on the search for someone to try to fill the void. He thought maybe that having that affection, because he did have affection from his family. His mother was very nice, as described in the book. But I don't think Andre Agassi really knew what a relationship was. He never really knew the true feeling of love. And so he tried finding that through Brooke Shields. And he tried to find that person to fill the empty space. But the problem with this actress, this beautiful actress that he married, is that she didn't understand. And as I write it here in my notes, I wrote, Andre was always looking for the answers, but no one understood the question. And Andre Agassi thought that Brooke would be the answer, that she'd be the solution that he was looking for, someone that could put his mind at ease. And I think she did grant him that at a specific time early on in their relationship. But as she went on and truly discovered that she had no idea what was going on in his mind, and she tried to relate but she couldn't, so they grew distant. And I think that made Andre Agassi very confused, and this void that he tried filling, she couldn't fill. So they broke up, they separated, and Andre Agassi, I don't think he had ever been more depressed. And all this was going on and he was still playing tennis, the one thing he only knew and only had. And this battle within his mind never diminished, and it was still there. And even though he had grown and matured, this voice within his head and this battle with himself never diminished. And as time went on, he began losing, and he became so harsh on himself, and he made that really stand out throughout the whole book. And the successful tennis player that, you know, one would assume they love tennis, but he hated it. He absolutely hated it, but he continued playing it. And even though he beat himself up for it, he couldn't stop, because he had to be the best. He had to be number one. He had to succeed. But yet he was just not happy in his life. And throughout the majority of the book, he gave off this sense, even from an early age, that he was not content with his life and that he was not happy. He was living a life that really seemed to have no meaning to him. And near about his 30s, he came across another player named Steffi Graf, and there they are. They met at the end of Steffi's retirement, and here are their lovely 2 children. But the thing about Steffi was, at the beginning, they seemed quite different. 2 completely different individuals that were playing the same sport, but yet Andre portrayed himself to be very much an outsider. He was very much an individual. He hated tennis. But as we dug deeper into the character and the real life character of Steffi Graf, we discovered that she had been through so many similar real life situations, and that her father treated her the same, and she didn't really like tennis as much as she portrayed herself to be in front of the public. And so Steffi really understood Andre Agassi's mind, and with that, Andre Agassi was able to find peace. And it was quite ironic that Andre Agassi hated tennis, but through tennis he was able to find himself. The one thing that was the cause of him not being able to truly know who he was on the inside was a thing that led him to the path where he ended up finding himself. And with Steffi, she filled that void, that constant battle with his mind. She was able to come in and take over, because once Steffi came in, this battling with himself, these losses, this game of tennis, this public press, this hate mail became so insignificant, because he found something that was way more important than that. And so all this battling and all these thoughts from his father, you have to be number one, he didn't want to be number one. He took that spot of number one and he put Steffi in his place. because he had finally found that one thing that he truly wanted, and he felt that love that he had never felt before. And I think throughout the whole book, the problem was that this battle was not a battle he could overcome by himself. It had become too out of hand that he needed help. And Steffi was able to diminish the conflict of his mind because she understood from that perspective. And it's funny because you imagine that a tennis player would really, he had won all these Wimbledons, these US Opens, Australian Opens, he had won all these Grand Slams, had all these medals, he had traveled the world, yet he was so depressed. He had everything, but he felt so much misery. And throughout his whole career in tennis, the best thing that ever happened to him was finding his wife and having his kids. And that he really made evident in the end of his book, especially, that he was so depressed when he was playing tennis, but when he found his wife, he found this joy that had overcome, that made all the pain and struggles in his past worth it. And so it was really interesting to see that he did go through this major conflict, but this conflict really led him to the state of happiness that he had yet to lose and has yet to lose. And he found something that was better than himself. He was brainwashed to think that he must be the best, but in the end he decided that that's not true, that my children, my wife, these people are better than I. And he was completely accepting of that. In fact, he wanted it to be like that. And that's truly what helped him overcome this conflict within his mind. And he was able to find peace. And that's my thoughts on the conflict. And that's the message I got from this book. And I thank you so much for watching this. If you have any questions, please email me. I'll talk to you in class whenever. I love this book, and I love sort of the message that it portrayed to everyone. It was quite interesting and an eye-opener. It really lets you have an in-depth look into his life, and you came out thinking in a different perspective. So I'd love to talk and elaborate on this if you'd like, because it was a very good book. Thank you so much for watching my presentation. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you soon. Bye.